As the second region to introduce the high-speed train on its long-distance operations, the arrival of these 125-mile-an-hour express sets helped to maintain the East Coast Main Line's long association with among the fastest trains on the British network, the line almost having been purpose-built for trains like the HST thanks to its naturally straight and level profile. The East Coast Main Line was formed through the amalgamation of several individual sections of railway, the primary route between London and Edinburgh being formed through the combination of the Great Northern Railway, the North Eastern Railway, and the North British Railway, the Great Northern having first established a terminus in London at King's Cross Station in 1852 and built as far north as Peterborough in York, while the North Eastern built the section between York, Newcastle and Berwick, and the North British Railway brought the route to the Scottish capital, with onward connections across the lowlands and highlands of Scotland. The terrain of the East Coast Main Line had always been more favourable to that of the rival West Coast Main Line, potentially allowing trains to operate at their full speed without hindrance between London and Darlington, except for three notable bottlenecks at Peterborough, Selby and York, after which the line curves through the hills of County Durham to Newcastle, and then wingles along the North Sea coast to Edinburgh, while the West Coast Main Line had always been hamstrung by the rolling hills of the Chilterns, Staffordshire and Lancashire, before having to climb the arduous Lune Gorge and over Beatock Summit on its way to Glasgow. In 1923, the Railway Act grouped the Great Northern, North Eastern and North British Railways, among others, into one company, the London and North Eastern Railway, or LNER. The goal of this new railway company, to place emphasis on both speed and stylistic travel during the boom years of the Roaring Twenties, culminating in the legendary Gresley A4 Pacifics and their corresponding articulated coaching stock, these streamlined express locomotives being the ultimate mixture of engineering and a crisp design that helped propel it into the history books with 4468 Mallard's record-breaking run in July 1938. However, all this and more was laid waste following World War II, where, after nearly 6 years of conflict, the railways were now battered, broken and bomb-damaged, the LNER suffering the worst, as their prestige trains and lavish locomotives were reduced to shadows of their former selves, putting aside their past glory in order to cut costs for the cash-strapped company, as well as its nationalised successor, British Railways, formed in 1948. While BR's formation promised many improvements, few were delivered due to their complete underestimation of the task at hand. The modernisation plan of 1955, which intended to replace steam with a vast array of diesel and electric locomotives, shelving original plans to electrify the route due to the cost of rebuilding the roof at King's Cross Station, in favour of creating a dedicated high-speed diesel-electric locomotive, this coming in the form of the 22-strong fleet of Type 5 Deltics, the first diesel locomotives to run at a sustained 100 miles an hour in the UK. Although the Deltics were formidable machines, reducing journey times significantly over the previous A4 Pacifics, by the early 1970s, BR's expansive but largely unnecessary range of locomotive classes meant that standardisation was required to cut this massive overhead, the 22 Class 55 Deltics being singled out as, while they could perform superbly, they were extremely complicated to maintain and operate due to their use of marine-derived Napier power plants. In 1972, a suitable replacement arrived in the form of the Prototype HST. This train, comprising 2 power cars and 8 brand-new Mark III coaches, having been built as a forerunner to the Tilting Advanced Passenger Train or APT concept. The delays incurred during the APT project demanding that an interim measure be created to try and revive dwindling passenger numbers on the network as more customers turned to motorways and domestic air travel alternatives. Testing of the Prototype HST initially began on portions of the East Coast Main Line around Hitchin, between London and Peterborough, but soon the set migrated north to the longest straight section of the line between York and Darlington, a flat corridor across the Yorkshire levels known as the racetrack, and it was here that, while under trial, the prototype reached 125 miles an hour, before taking home a record-breaking top speed of 143 miles an hour on June 12, 1973, making it the fastest diesel-powered train in the world. The prototype's tenure on the East Coast Main Line would end in late 1973, whereupon it was sent to the Western region for further testing and to undertake a short passenger service career, eventually giving rise to the production HST sets, which entered service on the Western region between London Paddington, Bristol and Cardiff in October 1976, quickly proving themselves to be fast, reliable and comfortable successors to the worn-out loco-hauled trains that preceded them. Noting the success of the HSTs in the West, the Eastern Region management elected to employ these trains in order to replace both the aging Deltics, but also other loco-hauled services operated by Class 47s, and thus the first HST sets entered service on the East Coast Main Line in 1977, their formation differing from the Western Region sets through the fitting of both first and second class buffet cars, although the latter was replaced by a second class coach. Very soon, the HSTs had become the pride of the East Coast Main Line, officially taking the reins of the legendary Flying Scotsman service in May 1978, while the much-loved Class 55 Deltics were quickly relegated to mundane semi-fast and supplementary services, including sleeper trains and parcels workings, before finally meeting their end in January 1982. As for the HSTs, their influence quickly brought about major infrastructural changes to the route in order to fully exploit the speed they could provide, the most notable improvement to the East Coast Main Line's track work being the creation of the Selby Diversion, a 13-mile rerouting of the East Coast Main Line that avoided the town of Selby in Yorkshire, which had long been a bottleneck for the line due to the presence of the two-track Selby swing bridge over the River Ouse. With the opening of the Selby Diversion, which itself is capable of 160-mile-an-hour operation, making it the first dedicated high-speed section of track in Britain, non-stop HST services were able to run at a near constant 125 miles an hour for 188 miles between London and York, slashing the London to Edinburgh run from 6 hours by the previous Deltics to 4.5 hours, full distribution of HST sets on the Eastern region being completed by 1979. Aside from the primary Flying Scotsman service between London and Edinburgh, HSTs also worked among the longest trains in the UK, the most notable being the now famous Highland Chieftain, a 581-mile journey between London and Inverness, which replaced the loco-hauled Clansman in 1984. The HST is capable of completing the journey in approximately 8 hours, while the other lengthy journey of note for the Eastern HSTs was the Abedonian, a 523-mile run from London to Aberdeen, which was completed in 7 hours, this service now known as the Northern Lights. In addition, the favourable topography of the racetrack in Yorkshire allowed the HSTs to rack up numerous speed records, with the record for fastest average speed of a diesel-powered express train coming on September 27, 1985, when the Tees Tyne Pullman, running between Newcastle and London, reached 140.1 miles an hour, while also averaging 115.4 miles an hour during the non-stop run, completing the 268-mile journey in 2 hours and 20 minutes. It was on November 1, 1987, though, that the HST cruised into the history books when, after 14 years, the record held by the Prototype was beaten by power cars 43102 City of Wakefield and 43159 on a dedicated 3-car set running between York and Northallerton along the racetrack, bringing in a top speed of 148 miles an hour during the test run, and making it the fastest diesel-powered train in the world, a record it still holds today. HSTs dominated the East Coast Main Line until 1988, when the route was electrified beyond the then end of the wires at Peterborough, north to Leeds, Bradford and Edinburgh, after which top expresses were handed over to a fleet of 31 Class 91 electric locomotives and their corresponding Mark IV coaching stock. However, due to delays in delivering the Mark IV coaches, alongside both the Class 91s and the unique Class 89 prototype, testing of the locomotives, together with initial service operations, was supported by a dedicated fleet of Class 43 power cars and Mark III trailers, the 9 selected HST power units acting as proxy driving van trailers or DVTs, and were fitted at Stratford Works in East London with buffers and conventional bell and hook couplers, which replaced their streamlined lower balancing. Once full deployment of the Class 91s and Mark IV sets had been completed in 1991, buffered HST power cars returned to the wider fleet, while sets which had previously formed the backbone of East Coast Mainline operations were distributed across the network to other regions, those HSTs remaining in operation on the Eastern region being used solely for services beyond the extent of the electric wires, specifically to Inverness and Aberdeen. On April 26, 1996, the East Coast Mainline franchise was awarded to the Bermuda-based Sea Containers Company to form the Great North Eastern Railway, or GNER, the firm inheriting a fleet of 21 power cars which were outshopped in the company's distinctive midnight blue and orange waistband livery. In the midst of a highly diverse period in traction for the East Coast Main Line, including, at a single time, the use of Class 91s, Class 90s, the unique Class 89, and even Class 373 sets from the failed regional Eurostar project, HSTs remained a vital part of GNER's long-distance operations, helped further by a rapid increase in their numbers, following an influx of sets made redundant when Virgin Cross Country replaced their fleet with Class 220 and 221 Voyagers, with 30 power cars and 15 full sets on their books by 2007. During that same year, as part of the Project Mallard refurbishment scheme undertaken by GNER to improve the reliability, comfort and quality of their trains, the company, after seeing the efficiency of these power plants on First Great Western's HSTs, introduced the MTU 16V 4000 engine to their fleet to replace the original Paxman Valenta power units. But sadly, GNER would not see the end of this program, as due to financial instability in the Sea Container's parent company, as well as being unable to meet the strict demands of the UK government's franchising policy, GNER was officially dissolved on December 8, 2007, replaced by National Express East Coast, or NXEC. National Express's takeover of the East Coast Main Line was ill-timed though, as it coincided with the 2008 credit crunch, thereby resulting in increased fuel prices and reduced passenger numbers that saw the franchise struggle to meet its requirements, eventually being surrendered back to the government on November 13, 2009, when National Express defaulted on its debts, replaced by East Coast Trains, which was run directly by the Department for Transport, or DFT, before being awarded back into the private sector through a Stagecoach Virgin joint venture in 2015, the more recognisable Virgin brand being adopted as the face of what was now to be called Virgin Trains East Coast, even though Virgin had a minority share. Again though, Virgin too struggled to maintain both profits and passenger numbers, and thus, on June 23, 2018, the franchise was renationalised into the London and North Eastern Railway, or LNER, which will retain the East Coast franchise until 2025, but despite having operated under 4 different companies within 11 years, HST operations during this period remained largely unaffected. Of note, however, was the start of open access operations by Grand Central in December 2007 between London and Sunderland, with 3 sets powered by 6 buffered Class 43 power cars working 5 services per day, these being complemented from 2009 by the arrival of redundant ex-First Great Western Class 180 units, which helped to open up new routes to Bradford via Halifax, while in 2010, Grand Central's HST power cars had their original Valenta engines replaced by MTU power plants. HST-operated Grand Central services lasted until December 2017, when the arrival of further redundant Class 180s from Great Western allowed the company to standardise their fleet and retire the HST sets, these being transferred en masse to East Midlands trains to work 6-car services between London St Pancras and Nottingham, supplementing Class 222 Meridian units. As for the flagship HST operations with LNER, in 2016, Virgin announced that it would partake in the wider Intercity Express programme, with brand new bi-mode Class 800 and Class 801 train sets being introduced to replace both Class 91s and HSTs on the electrified and non-electrified network, Virgin's original order for 35 sets being honoured by LNER following the collapse of the franchise in 2018, and increased to 65 sets, the first units entering service in May 2019. With Class 800s and 801s coming online throughout 2019, HSTs were quickly slated for withdrawal, the last 14 sets still in use by LNER finally meeting their demise on December 15th of that year, the company's 32 power cars being either transferred to East Midlands Railway or Cross Country, or being placed into long-term storage pending an uncertain future. Again, much like in the West, the HST's role on the former Eastern region didn't end here, as, from October 2018, 26 redundant Great Western sets were refurbished and reformed into 4 and 5 car short rakes working under the brand Inter-7 City, the 7 representing the 7 cities of Scotland which are served by this new operation: Glasgow, Edinburgh, Stirling, Perth, Dundee, Aberdeen and Inverness. The introduction of these HST services replacing many Class 170s and Class 158s on among ScotRail's longest journeys, as well as on core commuter routes requiring extra capacity. Sadly, while one set was lost during the Stonehaven derailment of August 12, 2020, when an Aberdeen to Glasgow service struck a landslide and tumbled down a steep embankment, killing 3 and injuring 6, thus making it the first fatal accident on the UK mainline network since the Greyrig derailment of February 2007, and the first fatal HST accident since the Irvton-Nervett crash of November 2004, the Inter-7 City service has introduced vast improvements to ScotRail operations, with short-rake HSTs continuing to provide valuable service across the Scottish nation. Nevertheless, the HST, despite holding the mantle of East Coast flagship for only 11 years, was a major step into the future for Anglo-Scottish express trains, and in so doing found a deserving place in the legacy of the Eastern region and its passion for speed.